Welcome back, everyone. Here with me today is David Bishop, partner at Brick Meets Click, and we're going to discuss the latest eGrocery insights from April 2021. My name is Mark. I lead the marketing team at Mercatus, where we help grocery retailers get back in charge of their e-commerce experience. David, I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it.
Awesome, Mark. It's great to be back and look forward to the chat.
Fantastic. Okay, we've done a number of these. This is April 2021. Thank you for sharing the deck with me in advance. I have a few questions, obviously. What is the big takeaway for this month's report?
Well, not to be a broken record, but as we said in the past, we were expecting that 2021 would be a choppy year. We've also kind of thematically described it as the year of reconciliation. And I think what we're seeing in the results so far in April, I think, is just the latest evidence to that, is that those two points are holding true. Sales have gone up after declined last month. And we're seeing shifts that are again creating other challenges that retailers have to respond to in different ways. So again, choppiness and reconciliation are still the themes of the day. Now, what to do about that? That's really the $60,000 question that retailers and providers like yourself really need to be addressing today, if not yesterday.
Let's get into the specifics. So for April, online sales came in at 8.4 billion, down from the high in March. I think it was 9.3 billion, but up 16% from a year ago, April. That increase from a year ago, what is that indicative of?
Well, there's a variety of things. And I think, while some retailers are now doing a stacked 2-year comparison because of the anomalies that we had last year with the start of the pandemic. And let's just keep in mind that while the pandemic hit the U.S. shores in mid-March, retail restrictions really weren't in full effect until April. And that's the same thing with stay-at-home. So this is really the true year-over-year lapping that we've been waiting for. With that being said, we can look at things like average orders, which maybe decline slightly for pickup and delivery, maybe about 2%, essentially flat. But if we were to look at that versus pre-pandemic, it's still up over 10%. If we look at order frequency, again, versus year ago, April 2020, it's up slightly. Again, you could say essentially flat, but versus pre-pandemic, it's up over 30%. So as you go through those things, there is some reason for doing a comparison that is looking before the pandemic to really kind of anchor this as a reference point of how far we've come, keeping in mind that April 2020 was the high watermark for so many things. So for instance, unemployment hit its peak in April 2020. And now we have subsided considerably. And in this year, we're at 6.1%, whereas last year, we were at something like 14, nearly 15%. So a lot has changed in a year, but to provide some additional context and clarity, it's helpful to step out of the year-over-year comparison and really look at what was the business like before the pandemic, which is why we continue to also look at, what our trends were pre-COVID using August 2019 as a proxy for that. So again, a lot has changed, but we can't forget how far we've come in such a short period of time.
Great point. And one of those elements that has changed is the continued consumer shopper engagement, use of curbside pickup. That upticked a little higher in April than it did in March, and is significantly higher than a year ago, April.
Yeah. So when you look at pickup, people really are trying to understand what's driving this trend. I think, again, if we step back and we're looking at delivery and pickup only, there are two factors or elements or attributes, whatever term you want to use, that we can see are motivating some of these shifts. And they go around two areas. One is cost. So a person who is shopping online for delivery or pickup generally pays a lower cost to use a pickup service that's either half that for conventional regional grocers, or maybe zero if we're talking about mass discounters. So there is that. And when we look at unemployment or participation rates, look at wages, now put on top of it inflation, customers are going to become a little more savvy in terms of how they can stretch that buck. And so for someone who finds shopping online for delivery or pickup attractive, but now affordability starts to creep in, cost becomes a real important factor for considering how I receive that online order. The second piece of that is control. And the idea of control here is the notion of getting the products or receiving the order when I want, the way I want. And so when we look at delivery, delivery generally is framed up as a receiving window. We have 1 hour windows, 2 hour windows, and more. And so the perception to the customer, because of long entrenched behaviors in other industries that customers have this experience with, think the cable guy, right? Will be there between 1 and 4. What happens? The cable guy shows up at 3:58 unapologetically, right? And so the notion of the window by which you receive it, 1 hour, 2 hour, or whatever, is the degree of control you are giving up, because that means you're likely required to be around. And that's especially true if you have age restricted products or prescriptions, or you have highly perishable items that are temperature sensitive and you want to maintain that cold chain. Pickup is different, and the control is, even though you may have a 1 hour pickup window or a 30-minute in some cases, it's your determination as to when you go to the store and when you receive that order. And until that time, that order, at least in theory, is being maintained on behalf of you by the retailer. So the control part of it is really kind of chain of custody around those highly perishable or age-restricted products. So for those two reasons, the cost and control, pickup has a lot more benefits for the customer relative to the overall experience. And so those are two reasons, on top of the fact that pickup is still being backfilled in the US, that more and more demand is shifting to that method of receiving online orders.
And what's interesting is that emphasis on, well, at least the shopper engagement with curbside or pickup, that's putting a lot more emphasis on the retailer in terms of their operations and being able to fulfill those orders at a level that keeps those shoppers coming back.
Yeah, if you think of most regional grocers and they have a 1 hour pickup slot, generally their capacity is 6 to 7, maybe 8 or 9 orders an hour. Obviously, that's predicated on their assembly processes, whether they're using enhanced pick and pack systems like Shopper Kit, right? The alternative is to simply put more bodies against it and put more assemblers or pickers in the store to do that. So it is a very real issue that retailers have to address in the immediate term. Obviously, longer term, there's interest in other automated solutions, but that takes time. But yeah, this is without question something that the retailers are gaining increasing control over. We've seen this even with retailers who have third parties who had traditionally picked and packed their orders in store, taking that back, because this is an important interface with the customer and owning those connections, which is one of the themes and strategies that we've been advocating, that any regional grocer who aspires to have a sound and sustainable strategy going forward in online really understands.
And obviously, and there's a cost element to this conversation that you've already mentioned. The cost of, there's a financial cost, but there's also a brand and reputational cost. Can you comment?
Oh, yeah. That? Yeah. I mean, if someone pulls up in your parking lot to get an order from your store, regardless of who's picking and packing that, the risk is on you, the retailer, because after all, it's your brand that they're interacting with. So, the ability to influence or control that process is critical, especially if there are, friction points or pain points, right? One of the biggest friction points right now is the wait time. And, we've said this time and time again before, which is there still are wait times that are in excess of 5 minutes. I mean, at 5 minutes, it's kind of like you stop counting because it's just adding insult to injury. But for the customer who's in their car, 5 minutes seems like eternity. Frankly, 2 minutes seems like eternity.
It does.
Especially if you've got a screaming kid in the back. So if you can't introduce and implement geolocation services to facilitate a better curbside or pickup experience, then you have challenges in front of you that require you to do other things first. And that's where we're at. We understand these things take time with contracts, but the risk and the reward here is so great for the retailer. Not doing anything is really not an option anymore.
Couldn't agree more. Let me ask you, what surprised you in the latest numbers? Was there anything that you said, that's an interesting point?
What we're seeing, looking at age cohorts, right, is that core online shopper is, not surprisingly falling in that early formation family stage. So this is your, 30 to 44-year-old age group. And you know what? On a year-over-year basis, there's been a nominal decline in usage in that segment. Whereas, the younger customer, 18 to 29, we've seen over 10%. The over 60 group, we've seen over 20% drop. The core customer really has stuck with online. And at the same time, where they've really amped up in terms of engagement is with pickup. Their interaction with delivery is pretty stable on a percent of monthly active users basis. But we had a 10 percentage point jump with the monthly active users in that mid group going into pickup. That was really surprising. And I think, again, indicative of some of these external factors swirling around, relative to, price inflation, maybe wage pressures, and all those other things that are motivating them to reconsider other ways of receiving. And at the same time, we can see in the likelihood to reuse the same shopping service, while we're up 5 points versus last year, we're still significantly below where we were pre-COVID, which means these people are simply going to experiment with other services to find something that they perceive to be an acceptable alternative.
So let me ask you about that, because that's a number I wanted to call out. August 2019, you had, I think, a 92% repeat intent for those users who have used the online service 4 times or more. April 21, the number's at 75%. Is that August 2019 cohort, could we classify those as the diehard e-commerce shoppers? Smaller in an aggregate number, but in percentage terms, very significant in the overall e-commerce basket.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to that August 2019 number, really, we didn't have the pandemic as a catalyst for driving online adoption. So at that point, it was a positive word of mouth. It was a medical issue.
Early adopters.
Yeah, all the things around the early adopters, right? That they saw that. So yeah, I think, the attractiveness or stickiness was very clear there. Now, as we go forward today, the water's a little murky because we have a lot of people who've moved into shopping online for delivery and pickup that did so because of concerns about COVID or because of issues related to COVID, right? Retail restrictions, stay-at-home orders, whatnot. So, the diehards are still there, but we still have some kind of fence sitters, which is, this is acceptable for now. And the now is until I'm vaccinated, until, new cases go down to a level where I'm more comfortable, or some other range of factors that, we haven't identified. So, it's understandable that the rate is lower now because we have a much larger base, and that base includes not just diehards, but some people who, out of circumstance, have elected to shop this way. That's really the question: is how many of those who have switched to this method post-pandemic starting stay with it, right? That's really where the stickiness needs to be understood better. But that is also muting that likelihood to reuse again, because their preferences, their motivations are driving some of those responses.
So on that point, and I know we haven't talked about this. So it was announced earlier this week, I think an article, a reporter on Recode said that Walmart has identified that they're more concerned about losing the online war as it is, and feel threatened by the numbers that are coming out of other online fulfillment channels. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, Walmart is in a very unique, peculiar, and awkward situation. It's unique because, unlike most regional grocers, they're playing across all three methods of receiving online orders, which notably includes ship to home. And ship to home was the area that Walmart has continued to try to defend, primarily against Amazon. Whereas most regional grocers, exclude some of the nationals that have aspirations to have their own marketplaces, are really just delivering pickup. And the challenge now is, as they compete against Amazon with ship to home, they're also now having to compete and deploy resources against delivery and pickup. And we can see how Walmart has executed their delivery strategy is fundamentally different than the way, for instance, their other competitor, Target, has done so. Target acquired Ship, was able to bring in a third-party gig platform to support not only their business but others. And at the same time, pickup really has been a friction point for Walmart. And it's not because there's not demand for it; it's that there's too much demand for their capacity. So they continue to bump up on capacity constraints in pickup that force customers to make a choice. Do I take at 9 a.m. a pickup that may be at 8 o'clock at night, or do I go to the next day? And ironically, at the same time, we're still seeing some degree of capacity constraints, albeit for different reasons, with delivery. So while they rolled out Walmart Express and Walmart Plus, and they've removed their purchase minimums to help make it more attractive, which is a curious issue in and of itself, what we see is, even in the last month, if you were looking to buy groceries online from Walmart for home delivery, and I tried this, I would not have been able to get same-day delivery from Walmart for groceries unless, if and only unless, I opted for Express. So if I'm not a Walmart Plus member, that means I'm paying almost $18 in fees. If I'm a Walmart member, obviously I'm only going to pay the membership plus the Express charge. They'll waive, quote unquote, the $7 or $9.95 delivery fee. So we can see that some of the choices that Walmart has made has compounded some of the challenges they have. And some of the capacity constraints are driven by their own choices, and some are also driven by the drivers that support them. So it's a very complex topic. And again, Walmart in general is doing relatively well, but others are doing better. And I think that's what that article earlier this week was alluding to, which is, their concern is they're losing market share because they're not satisfying those needs as effectively as others.
100%. I'm going to ask you to prognosticate going into the May numbers. What effect do you think the Colonial pipeline shutdown will have?
Interestingly, so if we look at kind of the first order derivative of it, obviously there's going to be supply shortages in markets that are serviced by the pipeline. We're already starting to see that at convenience stores and other fuel centers. The second order derivative from it is that those communities impacted are going to have to make choices. In some cases, they're being urged to change, the schooling practices to alleviate the need to bus children to and from school because of that shortage. At the same time, fuel prices are going up for consumers, which means, generally speaking, consumers will drive less, assuming they have the ability to do that. So, all those things mean that if people are driving less, they're staying home more, right? Which means online shopping could potentially have some tailwinds as a result of that. Now, again, there are going to be some regionalities there. The South, Southeast are more impacted than the Midwest where I'm at. Ultimately, those are fuel-related price surges that could impact delivery fees, right? There may be special surcharges, which is customary when we have a rapid increase in the price of fuel, that we'll see a $2 or $3 surcharge added. So that could create a headwind if, in fact, that happens and consumers start to see this added cost. So again, swirling currents just make it very hard, but just shows that we're going to continue to have some turbulence. Now, this is turbulence we didn't expect. At the same time, I don't think we expected the inflation to rise at this rate. Now, the latest numbers are, 1.2% year over year. That actually is fairly in line with some of the forecasts that we've given retailers. It's most pronounced, believe it or not, in the West, where it's up over 2%, and in the South, where it's up about 1.6. It is not present in the Northeast, and in the Midwest, it's up by about 6/10 of a percentage point. So it's very regionalized, and it's isolated primarily to things like produce and meat right now. The rest of the basket of grocery-related items is fairly flat on a year-over-year basis. So again, as we look at those things, what we can see is a retailer in those regions and customers who are more inclined to be heavy consumers of those products are going to react correspondingly to those changes, just like with the price of fuel. So it's really kind of fascinating to see how it plays out. But if anything, it just shows what retailers are always having to be prepared for, which is these external factors that create other forces beyond the competitive forces that require them to respond more rapidly to maintain their relevance and their market share.
And you're right, it's fascinating. 10 years ago, we didn't have the option of ordering online amidst a pipeline shutdown. So
yeah, and you know what? I could really go back to, we had Webvan and we had Peapod, circa the turn of the century and a little bit before that. But, it's really important. The inflection point that I think digital shopping really needs to remember is 2007. 2007 was the introduction of the iPhone, right? And with that became the mass proliferation of
100%.
mobile apps. And once that happened, all of a sudden the world opened up. It didn't change overnight, but now people had the freedom and the liberty to shop anywhere because now they had a mobile device.
And little known fact, that's where Mercatus originated. Mercatus originally, Springboard Retail Networks, started as the grocery shopping list on hardware on the shopping cart. iPhone, Steve Jobs comes out with the iPhone, the company pivot. We pivoted to online ordering, facilitated with the mobile device.
Fascinating. And you claim 100% credit, Mark.
I do every time, especially when it's my annual performance review.
Yep.
It doesn't wash.
You and Al Gore. He invented the internet. You invented the mobile app.
Yeah, and there were tubes, lots of tubes associated with the mobile app.
Very good.
So, David, anything else in May that we can look forward to?
Well, again, April, we also did have about 60 million stimulus checks go out. That was far less than what we saw in March. So that's going to dissipate or taper when we get into May. We won't have that. However, it's important to remember that, with the CARES Act, there's 13 weeks of extended unemployment insurance for those people who are out of a job, looking for a job. That goes through early September. So we do still have some of those artificial stimulus mechanisms in place that are propping up current behaviors. Obviously, where that's important is in service industries, and the gig economy is a service industry. So one of the challenges they have is recruiting drivers and essentially getting them off their couch and in their car seat. Those payments make that a little more challenging. At the same time, I would add, There's also increased competition between the services. I do a fair amount of research on my personal time on YouTube and Reddit boards. And I think it's really interesting to note that, well, first of all, if you're a driver on any platform, whether it be, an Uber, Uber Eats, Postmates, Instacart, Amazon Flex, you're generally working multiple platforms simultaneously, and you're essentially arbitraging the offers to accept the ones that have the highest payouts. So when that happens, that means, retailers need to be aware of that, providers need to be aware of that, and pay commensurate with the market. I say that because if you look at Amazon Flex drivers, they tend to be consistently making $25 to $30 an hour in the pay structure that Amazon has put in place for those subcontract workers. That's very different than the pay structure and the pay programs that now are out there with Instacart or DoorDash or others. And even in the way they are promoting those potential payouts, that's ultimately affecting the acceptance rates, which ultimately affect the satisfaction that the customers who are ordering. And this is one of the challenges Walmart's faced after they lowered their minimum from 35 to 0. One of the unintended consequences we saw right out of the gate was that would reduce the potential payout to a driver, thus reducing the incentive to accept the order, which meant Walmart or the provider, in this case DoorDash, would have to bonus up the order before the window expired. But the problem is the drivers have become savvy enough now in communicating that a bonus on a order really is signifying that they're getting close to the delivery window ending, which means there's a potential for a negative review. And a negative review to a gig employee is devastating in terms of future earnings. So when you look at that full circle, you can't ignore that. If you're a retailer, you absolutely have to embrace and understand that as you deliberate and decide what to do going forward. So you can see Walmart may have taken a misstep there. If they didn't, I don't know the rationale for why they lowered the minimum. But again, if Walmart, is making those decisions that are causing these actions, it's understandable that others are as well.
Yeah, excellent, cogent analysis as always. Thank you, David.
Well, I appreciate that the mental acuity test that I just passed.
Thanks so much, David. Be sure to check out more of David's insights at brickmeetsclick.com. And for the latest from Mercatus, check out mercatus.com. Now, folks, we have a special live event coming up very soon. On May 26th, later this month, we will be on LinkedIn Live with Brick Meets Click, discussing the 3 operational strategies to get the most value from your grocery e-commerce experience. And thanks for watching.